just sat down to record this outside and it started raining, so I've reset up in here. We left off at Harkerville Forest Lodge near Neisner, which we got to in the pouring rain on a terrible dirt road. It rained all night and that revealed actually a number of leaks. So there was the air vent, which had like a fan that around the corners of and the edge of that on the roof of the van, it was leaking through that. There was a skylight, similarly it was leaking around the skylight, so there's two. And then at the back of the van, the back window, which was just a flat sort of plate glass, the sealant around that had obviously dried over the years. I don't think this van had ever been used outside of the summer before, and we were the guinea pigs to find that out. On the night of the Harkerville stayover, we rigged up like a bowl over George's side of the bed because it was leaking exactly there. So I slept just fine that night, but we had this very wobbly bowl. We chucked out of there quite early, probably 9-10 o'clock, and we drove the 25 odd Ks to Plett, which is just down the road on the N2. We found a coffee shop there, worked for the day, got me some new jeans. A nice, probably the best purchase of the entire trip was a step, a double step to get into the van, which was probably about a 2-foot height difference between the ground and the first step of the van before that. It made all the difference. It probably made the entire trip. And then my dad had a mate in Plett who's a mechanic, and we thought we should go there and he should check out the Xenon lights that had failed. So he did that and he had a look at them and he said, yeah, the transformers go on these things and like he didn't even want to touch because it's like 40,000 volts or something and he doesn't know what's going to happen. And then he said this happens all the time and he couldn't do anything about it. And then he suggested what we might do for the leaks with some waterproofing, like a big tube of waterproofing stuff. So we thanked him and we went on our way back onto the N2 to Storms River, which is about an hour and a half as I recall, at least in the van it was. You take this sort of nondescript turn off towards, it's called the Titsikama section of the Garden Route National Park. So it was a sand park campsite and we got in there, a couple of Ks entrance, another couple of Ks, and you drop down to the coast. And it's this exquisite set of campsites. There was no one there. We were right near the coast. We had one right along the front. We positioned ourselves sort of as far down and away from the other campers with caravans as we could. We had an ablutions block to ourselves. We could have chosen a campsite every night if we wanted to. We stayed there for 3 nights, I think. We managed to squeeze in a run that night when we got there. Not too long, but to the Storms River mouth, which was just beautiful. And they've got these boardwalks made out of recycled plastic. So we ran along those and it sort of climbs a bit and then undulates and then you get to the famous suspension bridge over the Storms River. So we spent a bit of time there, came back, a couple of hill sprints, and I think we made a braai that night, which was a bit windy and a bit unpleasant outside, but we made the most of it. And then on waking the next day, quite a nice day, but there were actually very few hours of sunlight, probably 10 to 3, because we were like quite close to the mountain, so the sun went down early and then it got chilly. So in the daylight hours, I thought I'd make hay while the sun shone, and I wanted to fix those leaks. So we'd picked up I think we found a tube of waterproofing sealant in the van, but I couldn't find a caulking gun. And try as I might, there was no way that I could squeeze the sort of waterproofing stuff out of this tube with my hand or any leverage that I was able to create. So it was a building site in Titsikama National Park, probably 500-600 meters away. So I figured I'd go there and ask them to borrow a caulking gun. They'd almost certainly have one, and that I could cycle there. So hilarious story now and terrible at the time. And can't remember what George was doing, probably working and making lunch. And so I pulled my bike off the bike rack and it got quite dusty on the dirt road. So I wheeled it around to the outside shower on the outside of the van, which is a flexi hose stored in sort of a cavity. I pulled it out and yanked it too hard, and the fitting inside the van sheared clean off and the pump was on. So water started spraying out into this open cavity, which is in a sort of cabinet below the sink in the bathroom, and the bathroom's a wet room. So everything in there is like perfectly sealed. So we can hear this thing like filling up with water as it's leaking. Sprinted round, G suggested we turn the pump off, great idea. We at least stemmed the tide, and then we realized we had to fix the leak and also dry up because there's probably wood and all sorts of construction in there, so we had to dry that up. We cut the silicon, pulled this fiberglass plate off, got in there, and there was a sort of nut that the hose had broken off. So it was a nut with a hole in it. Got hold of a mate of mine who runs a water treatment business, shout out, and to Ground to Tap Water Solutions, and he suggested cut out a piece of plastic from like a milk bottle lid or something, slightly bigger than the hole, put it inside that nut, and then put the washer against that and tighten it back up again. So we did that, tightened it up, perfect, pump back on, leak was fixed, bike still dusty, caulking gun still not borrowed, and leaks still not sealed. So rinsed the bike, got to the building site, they did have one, came back, squeezed it, nightmare working with the stuff, got back, told the owner, like I've been messaging the owner back and forth, oh, there's a leak here, you know, how could you not tell us about this? And he was like, oh mate, there's a caulking gun in the van, like under the back seat. So after all of that palaver, I didn't need my bike, which means I didn't need to rinse it, which means I wouldn't have broken the hose anyway. So nightmare. That was fixed, got some good sunburn. Couple more nights there. I think we went into Storms River Village and watched a Stormers game, was probably a semi-final or something. And then we headed out to a resort called the Misty Mountain Lodge, I think it was, which was about a 15-20k drive along the N2. So we had to go all the way out of the reserve, and their website had said that there was great mountain biking and running there. So we got there still unsure, and we decided to run, and we picked like a 15k route that looked quite cool. It went all the way to the coast. We went on it and it was atrocious. It was just a Jeep track run, like flat, all the way to the coast. And the furthest point, which was right on the coast, was actually a viewpoint in the property of the Tsitsikamma National Park that we had just left and driven for 40 minutes to get to another property to start. So we paid for a permit to do a run on a property we could have just crossed the Storms River Bridge to get to. We were a bit grumpy about that. And Storms River was great. That's really one of the highlights of the trip. From there, we jumped back on the N2. We had our sights set on Addo Elephant National Park, another Sandparks outlet. High-ish up on my priority list was to get an actual fitting to reattach the hose back to this broken fitting. So we got to PE at probably 1 p.m. No, it's Rebecca. And we went to 5 gas/hardware/plumbing shops looking for a fitting, and it was this weird hose in that the one side was metric and the one side was imperial, so no one had this fitting. Missioned around there. In between that, we bought G a laptop because she was taking her freelancing business to the next level, and so it was an absolute must to purchase that, and that was a nice highlight when we jumped in the van that night and opened it all up. We eventually found this adapter after driving around to 5 plumbing shops in PE at like 4 minutes to 5. They were about to close. We had them on the blower, like, please stay open for us. We're racing through traffic. It's like rush hour. But then the road from PE, which is roughly due north to Addo Elephant National Park, I forget the road name or number. At the time, I thought it was the worst road that I've ever had to drive on until later in the trip we got to Mpumalanga, and that was recalibrated. And we didn't have the brights either, so we just had these sort of dim main beam xenons, which weren't particularly good. So we couldn't see the potholes. We got there at 6:01, and they'd promised that they would close up if we were not there by 6, and someone had waited at the gate for us and let us in. That was probably the busiest campsite of the trip, but a really nice one, sort of laid out with stones and nice, like you feel like you're in sort of in the bush actually, which you are. That was really pleasant, and it rained that night, and it turns out that there was another leak, not above the bed this time, but the skylight leaked with that first bout of rain in Addo. We woke up the next morning, and I mean the first thing we needed to do was fill the water tanks because we were out of fresh water, but it was raining still that morning. I can't remember why I was so grumpy, but we backed the van into a nearby campsite. Quite an awkward thing. I mean, almost every campsite we had this problem. The 2 water tanks had filler caps near the back right hand side of the van, and it was really awkward to position the van because the hose that the owner had left us with was only like 2 meters long. So we would plug the hose into the faucet, and then we basically had to get the van within like 1.5 meters of wherever the faucet was, which was always tricky. We could have just bought another hose. I agree with you. So I can't remember why I was so grumpy. I think G had one umbrella and she like left me out in the rain while I was filling up the van. Water filled up. We needed to fill up with fuel before we could go do a game drive later that afternoon. So we went to the petrol station in Addo. It was sort of the only place with cover that you could leave a car under. So I thought that was a great time to to do the waterproofing of the skylight. So back on the roof again, caulking gun, now the one that we found in the van, in hand, up there for an hour, filling up the petrol tank, thousands of rands of fuel in these bloody gigantic tanks. But that was actually a really pleasant campsite. We did a number of short runs around there's a lot of sort of chalets that extend into the bush, almost into the Big Five section. And then there was this little trail called the PPC Discovery Trail, which was this beautiful little thing that sort of snaked for 2 or 3 Ks through the bush in the safe side of the reserve, which we did a couple of times. And then we also did a game drive there the one evening. So both of us very new to the bush and to game drives at all. And camper vans are extremely nice because you're driving around and your home is with you and you never have to unpack everything and repack it again when you leave. But the problem is if you want to go somewhere to the shops or to a nearby attraction or for a game drive, you have to up and leave with all of your stuff. So you got to pack away everything, make sure the cupboards are closed and locked because things fly around in short order. But it was a lovely game drive. I think we spent 90 minutes in there. We got up real close with some Ellies. Properly scared Georgia. I knew it was fine somehow, but I don't know where that confidence came from because I'd never been near Ellies either. I think that was 3 nights in Addo. Then we jumped on the road again, heading due north, and our next stop was Hogsback. And on the way to Hogsback, classic sort of Eastern Cape tourist attractions, we went via the Nanaga farm stall, famous for their pies and chutney and fruit juices, as I understand. There was a university that we went through and another place called Alice. Maybe the university was actually in Alice as well. So we sort of approached Hogsback from a southwesterly position. And Hogsback is this mystical place high up in the mountains at probably 900, 1,000 meters of altitude in the Eastern Cape. If you've heard of the Amatola multi-day hike, it's where that hike sort of is based. I did the hike about a year before this trip and it was beautiful, and I figured the trails would be great to return to for some running. We headed to Hogsback and I'd arranged some accommodation for us there, free accommodation at a place called Away with the Fairies, which is a backpackers. Reason being, I'd made some content, some video content of the Amatola hike that I did, and in 6 videos showcasing sort of the beauty of the hike and also where you stay in the night before and night after. So, and the owner agreed to give us 4 nights of accommodation in return for that. So that was the first time on this trip we'd stayed outside of the van, and we thought that would be very nice. As it turned out, in 4 nights of staying there, could never actually get everything out of the van that we needed into the cottage. So we were always back and forth, which was really quite a schlep because the cottage wasn't particularly well fitted out for cooking. So we were back, let's get the pan. We actually really found home in Pete the camper van. You may know about Hogsback that J.R. Tolkien took some inspiration from there. I can't remember if you just spent a lot of time there as a youth, but there's a lot of Lord of the Rings styling there, and it's quite a sort of dense, green, like mysterious, hilly place with lots of references to Lord of the Rings. One of which was the cottage we got placed in at Away with the Fairies, which had these ridiculously low doors that I kept. I'm not a long man, and I hit my head on the door frame every single time going into our bedroom. So door height less than 170 centimeters. Nice fireplace. I think we sat around playing guitar. There was a restaurant in the property. And to be honest, not much going on in Hogsback. We got severely exploited by the local laundromat, and they charged us a pretty penny, but the clothing was clean and the linen was folded, which I think was a nice touch. But some of the highlights were the 2 runs that we did there. The single tracks. So you don't actually hike on the single tracks on the Amatola trail. The Amatola ends about 4 Ks outside of Hogsback, but there are some beautiful trails from the town itself. So we did a short one on the first day. I think it was 6 Ks, sludgy and very muddy, but I just love like single tracks that snake through dense forest, and you've got like low sort of dense moss type coverings on the floor as you run past them, and beautiful. 2 days later we did a much longer one, which was I think 18 Ks and probably 600-700 meters of climbing or so quite a tough one. But the first 5 Ks on these single tracks were probably the best single tracks I've been on in my trail running years. Unfortunately, I did injure myself on that. Well, it's a recurring injury that actually, as of last week, I've found out through MRI is a cartilage issue. So it wasn't just an overuse thing. that I was worried about, but 17 Ks into those 18, I'd hurt myself. So it was a bit of a dampener on the trip that was supposed to be largely about running. And from then we pivoted mostly to riding with the odd short run. So it was great to have the bikes to fall back on. Hogsback was icy cold. We after the first shorter run, we popped in at the local brewery and did a flight of their beers. We tasted a flight of their beers, which was really nice. With the fireplace next to us after a cold run in the mountains. So it was quite a relief actually after 4 days there in a not so comfortable cottage to be back in the van and heading, what was it, would have been sort of southeast, basically due directly to the coast, and we were heading to the wild coast. We had no plan for the wild coast as such. I mean, there's so many places you can go there. It extends from sort of, I guess it starts in East London, as far south as East London in the Eastern Cape, and goes, I think it extends into KZN actually, into the south coast of KZN. And there's loads of places, Coffee Bay, Umdumbi, Treneries, Mgazi, Port St. John's. I mean, there's not much in Port St. John's, but there's a lot of places that you can go. So a mate of mine had referenced a place called Linsa. Linsa's the town, and Buccaneers on the Beach is the name of the backpackers, and it had a beautiful campsite down right at beach level, and there was absolutely no one there. Famous for, I think it's called Van Life? Or Van Fest or something like that, where a whole lot of campers congregate annually. Anyway, we just missed it. So we set up shop there, and the wild coast weather, even though it was winter in South Africa, was absolutely beautiful. I think we spent 3 or 4 nights there. Me sort of wallowing in the sorrows of my recent running injury. We did manage a nice cycle on the beach, and thriving, like went to go and work in the coffee shop each day. I remember filmed her coming back on her bike from work with her backpack on, looking like she'd had a hard day at the work office, but the sun was setting, and it was just great to have her back. We embraced, and then proceeded to be van lifers again, and cooked nice things and made a nice braai. And the one real highlight of that stay, there's a place called Emerald Vale Brewing Company, just a little bit inland, probably 6 or 7 k's inland from Buccaneers on the Beach. And they'd recently built some fantastic mountain bike and trail running routes. So we popped in there, and I say fantastic, they were very new, so actually not that well maintained as yet, or bedded in, if you will. We did I think it was a 15k ride, and it ended up being extremely hard. I mean, 300-400 meters of climbing. G was still very new to mountain biking. We had the switchback on the way out. It was probably a 200 meter climb out of the valley. I mean, switchbacks are very hard to climb, whatever level you're at, and she was just fighting with her bike, so the fact that there was a brewery there was very rewarding, and we polished it off with a pint full of carbs each after the ride, and we had smiles on our faces. So that was a nice day at Buccaneers on the Beach, and I'm going to leave it there for this time, and next time we'll pick it up as we headed sort of north along the wild coast.